Hi there, Jeff. It's good to see you today. I'm going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for being the GC. I'm going to have a discussion today with Jeff Levinson. Jeff is the Vice President and General Counsel and Secretary of NetScout. He has been with the company for almost 16 years, 15 years plus about 8 months. Jeff is very involved in the Association of Corporate Counsel. He's been a past president of our chapter, and he's been involved at the national level as well, leading a network. And he's a prolific writer. He's written quite a few things for ACC Docket and has published with Bloomberg and other outlets. So, Jeff, welcome. I'm excited to be chatting with you today. How are you?
Yeah, thank you, Gemma. Great. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it. And I'll tell everybody there may be occasions where I flip the interviewing role and ask Gemma some questions.
That will be fun. So let's get started right away. We're going to talk today about challenges and seizing opportunities so that we can lead not only within our departments, but within our companies and within the profession in general. So in that broad umbrella of ideas, Jeff, I want you to mention some opportunities that you have had recently within your career at NetScout where you've been able to seize an opportunity.
Sure. Thanks again, Gemma, and thanks for everybody participating today. Appreciate the chance to talk to you about some things. And I think there'll probably be a couple themes that we're talking about, but this first part is what is our role as in-house counsel? And we're going to talk about that, but the way I would dive into it here is how do you seize opportunities? I'll give a couple examples as Gemma suggested. One is you see things that aren't getting done, or you see things coming up that you feel need more attention, and I'll give you some specifics. Some are I'd say very classically we'll call legal. A few years ago, GDPR, the European data privacy regs were being talked about. This was even before they were actually enforced. And lots of companies were just not getting ahead of this. It was coming down the pike. People either didn't know or didn't know what to do with those types of regs. And so in our company, it takes a lot of people and a lot of cross-functional collaboration to address those issues. But I saw it, a year and a half before we knew it was going to be in place. And we see a deadline, but we don't see the cross-functional work to get to the right answer, to get to compliance. So it really takes somebody to call the meeting and get people in a room and say, we're forming this working group. This is the issue that we are facing. How do we solve it? Marketing, what do you have? You have to go through the inventory. You have to of personal data and that type of thing. And that goes all across the organization, working closely with IT, with all the groups to get to the right answer so that on that date in May, whatever that was, you're ready and you can say in good faith that you're complying. And so I think that the opportunity for the legal team is to say, this is something that needs to be done. How do we get the right people in the room? And a lot of times we're going to have to lead it, even if it's not strictly what I call a legal function. So we often bring a lot of people together. The other one that I think is even more interesting to me right now because it's more current, because I think of GDPR as a fairly compliance-heavy, very well within the range of what the legal team would be responsible for. But the one that I've written about, as you mentioned, Gemma, I do write about these things, is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And for me, that was something there where I was starting to see, in our case, customers asking questions about what our company, and we're a public company, we do cybersecurity, we do service assurance. So we're helping customers with their networks to make sure that where networks are important, and for most companies today, that's the case, that they're running in a way that the enterprise customer, the federal customer, the telco wants them to run. And so we're seeing demand from customers, large customers, saying, what do you do around all of these types of issues, whether it's climate change or diversity and inclusion or health and safety. And we were answering those questions sort of through different groups, but not in a consolidated or coherent, holistic response. And that's one where I felt like it was really important for us to not only have a good foundation, but also start to drive some change. And I can talk more about that, but that is sort of the hallmark of jumping into an area that's not strictly legal, but allows us, all of us who are inside in-house counsel, to take an opportunity to lead in an organization across functions with different groups and to drive change. Because there are a lot of questions that you can answer as to what you're doing, but really, where do you want to be and how do you get there? And how do you involve all the right managers and executives as well as the board? So it's a bigger, there's a bigger piece and discussion around that when you talk about why I wrote about it, but ultimately, that's one of those things where there's an opportunity. And to me, it's interesting. I wanted to do it.
So when taking those two examples, if you think about GDPR, it was a regulatory regime that was coming down the pike. A lot of the companies that we represent would have to comply, and if we didn't, there would be pretty severe financial penalties, right? There's a mandate there. When you look at ESG, on the other hand, now obviously around governance and some compliance issues, depending on the industries we're in, there's also some mandates, but it's a bit more, I would say, on the voluntary side of things. So when you're socializing these issues with your board of directors, your executive management, is there a difference? I mean, we have a hammer, right, when something is a mandate that we might not have in the ESG space. What's the distinction in how you manage those two? Yeah, if you agree with my assessment.
It's a great question, and it's sort of the continuum of how do we deal with this range of issues, and so I think that there are some foundational things that I think about, and one of the things I talk to my team about, and they get this, like I'm proud of the team that we've developed here, and I've also spoken to associates at law firms, for example, and I've talked when I talk on panels, and a foundational piece of this is if you're in-house, you really have to be able to deal with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you have to understand, so that VUCA, I think it originally came out of the US Army, but there's so many issues that are in these gray areas, right? That there is no clear answer. There's potentially no clear leader assigned for companies our size. If you're in a large company, you're going to have a sustainability organization and lots of resources. Most of us don't have additional resources to deal with these types of things. So you got to figure out a way to address that and be comfortable with that. And so I talk about dealing with that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, but I also talk about raising your hand and taking, essentially volunteering and seizing the initiative. Because I think of us as business lawyers, and we are lawyers, but we're business people. We bring a certain subject matter expertise. And so when I think about it, it is very different, Gemma. It's a great question because it's fairly easy to explain to people we have to comply with GDPR. There's really, there are ways to do it, and you do a risk-based, practical approach, and you have to bring people along because they don't understand it. And so there's a lot of nuance to it. But that ESG piece is very different. And so I think it goes to, do you want to be a leader in your company? Do you want your company to be a leader in this particular area? And with whom do you work in your company? So it's not that hard, but it's work. It's getting the right people in the room to have the discussion and to figure out who is going to do what. And we can't take it all on. It's a very operation-heavy initiative or program. We can help drive it. And the other thing I'd add for us here is that there are a lot of things that companies are doing already. And so when you talk about ESG, it may sound like this brand new, really interesting thing, but it's got all these pieces and nobody knows what they are, and the frameworks haven't been decided yet, or not converged upon yet, I should say. And so how do you deal with that? And the question is, what do you do as a company? What can you talk about that's the hallmark of what you do well? Are you already good in addressing climate issues? Are you already good in addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion? Can you now talk about that? And we have leaders here who want to talk about that. We now have an opportunity, a platform to do that, and we need to put some structure around it. So I'm not sure I fully answered the question. It's really more of volunteering, raising your hand, getting the right people in the room, and doing the work. Ultimately it comes down to it's just work, right? Now, Gemma, I do want to flip this right now because you've done a lot of different things too, and I just wondered how you thought about it. And then I won't flip any more questions, but I know you've done a lot in different sort of non-legal things, and you have some interesting thoughts on this.
So, and as I was telling you before we started, I've been talking with different groups about conducting inclusive meetings. And so that's something where I think anyone would agree is a good approach to have, right? You for a lot of reasons, you want your meetings to be as inclusive as possible. There are behavioral elements to that though, right? I mean, if I come to a group and I say to the group, okay, you are all empowered to call out microaggressions, and then, this most senior person in the room, unwittingly, not on purpose, might say something that would be perceived as a microaggression. Nobody's going to comply with that order, that mandate, right? So you recruit, I think, as you said, you raise your hand and you start to recruit people. You put on the hat as an educator and you talk about it. You promote a little bit, if you will. So we have that dual role of being legal and articulating why, from a strictly legal perspective, it's important to execute against these goals. But then we educate, we advocate, we do other things so that we can create consensus. To me, that's what it's about. What are the steps that you take to create consensus around the issue so that you can then push for budget, authority, executive buy-in, whatever it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, so. I think that's good. And I think that you and I probably agree that what we do is a team sport. We're not individual players. It is really, how do we make the team better?
Right. So on that theme, Jeff, you're moving to the table to talk about either, an environmental or social issue. I think and you wrote about this for ACC Docket, we've got the governance piece. We're solid there, right? But you're at the table now talking about the E and the S piece. What hat are you wearing? Are you showing up as the attorney? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back because a lot of the things we're talking about now are high value, very interesting, sort of high level, big visibility things in the corporation and outside. Right? Third parties are looking at this, investors and other stakeholders, communities, that type of thing. So if I take a step back, I'm operating on the assumption that we're doing the blocking and tackling correctly, that we're providing, before we can do all these really cross-functional, really interesting things, we have to make sure that we're doing the contracts correctly. We have to make sure that we're advising correctly around basic compliance issues. So there's sort of this threshold that I think we assume when we talk about these other things, that it's sort of implicit in how I think about our role, which is we have to get all the basics correct. And that's just the assumption, right? That we're doing all the basic legal things correctly so that we are then, I don't want to say freed up, but we have a foundation, credibility to do the plus work, the whatever's the plus from that. So, if you're just starting out in your career, you're probably focused more on how am I going to be really good at commercial contracts and licensing, or how am I going to be really good at corporate securities or advising my internal clients on employment. And then you start to think about, okay, I'm developing experience and judgment, and I'm going to apply those. Because I think I've spoken to law school students, and a question has come up, well, when I go into a law firm or wherever I'm going to go out of law school, how do I know what to do? I was like, well, you have the framework. You learn the framework. And then you just start building on top of the structure, all these things. So I think that So now you have the foundation, and now, Gemma, to your question, you're in the room and you're talking about ESG, and it is clear, that the G part is part of our charter, and we've dealt with that for years. And the E and the S parts are parts that other people have owned, but now we're bringing it together. So I would say that I'm not very explicit about, okay, I'm switching hats. I think people have an understanding that when I bring people in a room, I'm doing it as an executive who's leading this initiative, as opposed to necessarily the general counsel, although it's sort of blurred. If there's a question about legal advice or a compliance issue, that is a different question. That's something where I do make it clear that we're acting in a different capacity. But when we're talking about what I would call fairly business operations oriented type things, you're really more, and this is what in-house counsel talked about all the time, right? Do you have a seat at the table? Well, you're actually in this, you're in maybe the main seat at the table, and you're leading that discussion, which to me is interesting. Not everybody wants to do that. So you have to figure out what you're comfortable with and what you want your role to be. And then to your point, you do have to have good judgment and awareness of what's going on. Are we talking about a governance issue that's a legal issue that you are strictly responsible for? Or are you talking about an environmental issue where you have to get manufacturing or facilities involved and help drive that, as you and I say, in a team way and in a consensus building way?
All right, that's great. So one of the questions that we've gotten from the membership is wanting you to articulate the attributes of a proactive leader.
Okay, I'm guessing that anybody you talk to is going to have some shared attributes and some other attributes, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting question. Feel free to chime in if I miss something here. But it goes back to some of the things I've been saying. You certainly, we assume that if you're in one of these in-house roles, that you have the technical expertise, or you're going to learn it, that you understand. And I do feel like you have to own your subject matter area. As general counsel, that means you have to own all subject matter areas, and you have to know everything. And I'm not exaggerating much. You really have to know at least a little bit about a lot of things. But you build that over time. So you build those experiences. So I'd start with just the basics. You have to be good at what you do, and that doesn't happen on day one. That builds. Then on top of that, you need to think about, how do I apply judgment? How am I accountable to the board and the CEO or the business leader that I work with? So you have to be accountable. I feel like there are so many different things. There's the basics, then there's the judgment on top of that. There's the seizing opportunities or taking initiative, and that could be strictly legal type things. So how do you drive the commercial contract to conclusion, right? How are you the leader on that? And I think that you have to be comfortable with that uncertainty in our world, because we have gray areas. So go back to GDPR. When that came out, the rules there were some rules. Companies did not know how to address that. And if you ask outside counsel, they'd give you some ideas, but basically you could see them in the background saying, NetScout had a good idea. I may go share that with the other company, because they didn't have the answers either, even though they were. And so you sort of invent it yourself based on your legal judgment within framework of good faith operation. And then again, that evolves over time. So I feel like you have to keep an open mind. You have to be able to deal with that uncertainty. You have to raise your hand. And at the end of the day, it's not all glamour and glitz. It's rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. Those are some of the main things I would think about. I would go back to one other point, which is owning your area and being the go-to person within the company. So whatever it is, I think that's really important. And I think that outside counsel does a lot of really good things we work together really well. They can be very good partners. And in some areas that are really technical, or that you don't have you don't want to build core competency in your own department, in your own company, you might defer to them more. But I really don't want to defer to outside counsel on something that is sort of within the realm of what we do, because we own it and we're accountable and we're responsible. So when you're sitting in a room with the executive team or the business leaders, they're looking at you. They're not looking at outside counsel. And you can't say, outside counsel advised this. Well, when it goes south, it's on you. So my advice is own it. Learn from outside counsel. Understand the issues. Ask them lots of questions. Why this? Why that? Always ask the why questions and use them as needed, but really make sure that you understand why you're going a certain direction.
So you've talked about your team, and I know you're proud of your team, and you've talked about talking with law students who are about to enter the profession, maybe in the private bar or in-house. When you, in your role now as an attorney and a leader as the general counsel who seizes opportunities and does want to lead within both the function and the corporation, how do you empower your team, or how do you talk to people that are going to potentially enter the in-house practice about being proactive and taking initiative? How does that become distributed for you?
Yeah, it's another good question, and your questions are not easy when you think about these things. How do you do that? Part of it is did you hire the right people in, right? And you don't always know that. And sometimes people, sometimes people are very good at one thing but aren't able to shift, or they get to a certain level, which is fine. I mean, you need people to do certain things. And I'd say that the people who are continuing to grow on the team are the ones who kind of keep an open mind. And I think it's like any team. It's the ones that you see repeatedly raising their hand saying, I'll volunteer for this, I'll do that. It's not quite within what I've done or ever done. But if you think about it, we get things all the time where you're sitting in a room and the CEO turns to you and says, hey, we need to go do this. And you think to yourself, you say, okay, and you think to yourself, I've never seen this, I've never done this, but we've got to figure it out. And so, maintaining that sort of open mind and willingness to do it. And I think that goes also to some of these other skills that are not classically legal skills. They're either business skills, which I think I encourage people to learn and get educated on, but also sort of basic skills like presentation skills and writing skills and communication, and really project management. If you can do project management in an in-house legal department, you are worth your weight in gold, because it is not an easy task. You think it's easy, but it's really not. And it takes somebody who's really focused on getting to the right result, knows how to get there. I'll give you a simple example. At some point you're going to need a meeting of these people, but lots of times people don't think, oh, I've got to work back from that point and schedule that, even though it's a month out, and make sure people can attend that meeting. I mean, I know it sounds simple and kind of dumb, but you're working your whole project plan based on looking out to the future. So there's sort of basic things that you think about, but not everybody can do that. They're in the moment. You got to think, what's the big picture? How do I get there? How do I achieve that? And then again, the presentation skills and writing skills. And I do want to comment on a couple of those, if I may, Gemma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, presentation skills to me doesn't mean you have to be a great presenter. It's about communication. Can you communicate your message? And you have to, and can you be sort of culturally sensitive, and can you be sensitive to how people communicate? There's clearly gender differences in communication. You need to be aware of that. There are people, I know, there are people like me who are introverts that talking to people, getting in front of a room or getting on a virtual call are not entirely comfortable. It's not something I naturally do. So you need to figure out how each of us communicates and work within your style. There have been some people, when we get on, and I've seen some people at our company who do really good they get on stage, they own the stage, they walk around, they do all these great things, and that's not my style. My style is more straight, here it is, but if you think about it and you work on it, you can get better at it. And then on the writing side, again, it's practice. And the reason I write is well, I'll defer that question. I'll let you ask the question.
So we actually have a couple more questions from the participants. So I'm going to read this one. As a leader, you often need to motivate others to accomplish your goals. How do you handle situations where your team does not share your vision or may not be meeting your goals? Oh, that's a good one. So there's a disconnect in vision. What are you going to do about that, Jeff?
Yeah, there's probably a glib, funny answer, but I'll stick with the straightforward answer, which is why. The great thing about lawyers is that we like to do fact finding. We need to understand, and a lot of, depending on the degree, we need facts to understand what the issue is. And so my first question is, well, why aren't they motivated, or why aren't we lined up here? And it could be, and I think that all of us as leaders have to say, it's not the team's fault, it's I didn't do something right. So what was it? Did I not communicate our mission correctly? Did I not communicate the goals correctly? Is there something in there that tells me that there was some issue, that there's a disconnect in the communication or the goals? And I go back to as leaders in the company, we need to ourselves first understand the mission and the strategy. And and it can be very inspiring, but sometimes it gets a little bit lost. And so you have to continually refresh. What's the mission? How are we accomplishing it? And then what's our role? So if I've gone through that and I understand our mission, our strategy, and I've communicated that, and I think we can all do a better job of communicating with our teams and with others, because that's just perennial, a thing that we all talk about. Then is there a personality issue? So I would have to understand a lot better in the fact finding why people were not motivated. I mean, that was a very hypothetical general question, and maybe there's a specific, if the person wants to write in, maybe it's motivated to get back in the office or whatever. But I first need to understand it better.
So I think too, it's interesting that you say that, because when we lead, we're going to have folks who don't align fully with our leadership style, where we're coming from. You mentioned being a little bit introverted, for example. So we're dealing with different folks in every aspect of our career. For me, I have really tried to develop active listening, and that might sound cliche, but as a superpower. So expanding on what you said, I do want to know why. I want to understand where the individual is coming from and see if there is any commonality. And if there isn't, owning it, naming it, talking about that even sometimes will help, as we all try to execute against the same goals. Yeah. We are in an environment now where human capital and human satisfaction inputs are far more important than outputs, I think, for corporations in general. And so it is important to make sure that our teams feel heard.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know,
I think that's exactly right. And I just want to underscore that, because it's something I have to remind myself. I think you're good at making that your superpower, listening. Sometimes we forget to listen because we're going fast or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good point.
So we have another question. What are some of the best practices that you have adopted as a GC? How do you balance not micromanaging while still understanding and being accountable for your team?
Sorry, your audio.
Did you lose?
After.
Okay, let me read it out. Let me read the first part. It's what are some best practices that you have adopted as GC?
Could you just read the next part because it's going to help me?
Yes. How do you balance not micromanaging while still understanding and being accountable for your team?
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, the glib answer is you'd have to ask my team. They probably think I do micromanage a bit, maybe more than a bit. You know, it's so interesting. It's a question of I like here. I shouldn't be hesitant on this. The answer is to me as follows. You start loading people with responsibility and see how they respond, and they earn trust. And the more they do, the easier it is to say, okay, they have it. And I don't need to worry about that. Now, that does not mean I am hands off. It means that we have good communication, and the person responsible for whatever area that is keeping me updated. And so that's where it's a two-way street all the time, right? You need to have that constant communication. And if somebody is in charge of something, they are developing judgment to say, I think the general counsel needs to know about this, or we need to do a progress update, just because I'm sitting there wondering, well, wait a second, what's going on? I haven't heard from this person in 2 weeks. I don't know if we're meeting our marks. I don't know if we're hitting, passing the milestones. So there's a lot of responsibility on the person in charge, but to the extent you can have a good cadence of communication and keep somebody like me informed, then I think you get to do more and more, and I get off your back more and more. And that just builds over time. But it's really important to make sure that, we all talk about this. No one gets surprised. So I don't want to be surprised if there's something that's involving other executives. I need to know. But I think there is opportunity for people to earn responsibility. And I think, as our CEO says, we're going to trust first, and then you get more and more trust. As opposed, my inclination is I'm going to trust that you're going to do what you're supposed to do. That's why we hired you. We try and treat people as professionals. We can probably do better at that. It's constant calibration, but I think it works pretty well. And I think that people over time really earn that trust. And then you get to be the owner of your area, and you can run it basically the way you want, because back to your earlier point, Gemma, the team and I have already talked about what's our mission, what's our strategy, and we agree and align. And if there's a disconnect there, then there's going to be a problem down the road with all these on the execution side. But if you agree on strategy, mission, and everybody spends some time understanding where does the corporation need to go, what's our mission, then I think it's a lot easier for people to just take it and run with it. Micromanaging is bad. I've been micromanaged. I sort of chafed at that, not here, previous jobs. And so I get it.
So for the new leader, someone who's new to leadership, they have an opportunity to step up, to seize the day, if you will. What are first steps, and what are key traits that they need to foster?
There's a good way to put this. There's a good sort of initiative way to put this, and then there's the other way. The good way to put this is have a bias for action. Assume that you want to do something, accomplish something, and you've got to drive through that, because any company has bureaucracy and barriers, and we all have resource constraints. So there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of obstacles to overcome to accomplish things in a company, and we could probably all share stories about that. So the bias for action is really important. Understand, try to, how are you going to drive this forward, and understand that you have to navigate those obstacles, but bring people along and figure out how to overcome them. The other way to say this, which I don't say because this is not what general counsels should say, but ask for forgiveness, not permission. But it is a little bit of that. If you have good judgment and you're within the bounds, obviously we're going to comply with law. We're going to be squarely within the bounds, legal and ethical bounds at all times. But within that, how do you drive forward? And I'm talking sort of, how do you accomplish things within the company? So you have to have a bias for action. I will say again, it's another hallmark in my head, it's not really an attribute, it's really a foundation. I really like the term that Ben Heinemann, who was the former general counsel of GE, coined: high performance with high integrity. If you think about the department, how each of us should operate, it's high performance with high integrity. So that's how you drive forward. You're a bias for action. You're performing. Obviously, high integrity is the most important thing for what we do, because you have to have that before anything else, and you have to have credibility that you're going to keep people sort of safe in doing what we need to do, and help them with guardrails and steering clear of danger. That is the core of what we do. And then it's navigating through these things. So to accomplish things, you have to have that bias for action. And now, if you're new to this, a lot of it is really walking around. Now I think we can walk around and talking to people and making sure you built those relationships, and that you're explaining to people what you're doing, so it's not a surprise.
So I'm going to go off script here for a minute. I'm hearing bias for action, high performance. I've been reading a lot about return to work, what that's going to look like post-pandemic. There's a lot of folks that feel that we've moved to a model of working anywhere, anytime. And certainly as lawyers, we work long hours. You and I have talked about that, right? For women, we have our second shift. We have, care responsibilities and all of that. So how do you balance that, Jeff? If I'm new to your team and I hear bias for action or high performance, where's the balance?
See, this is what happens when you go off script. I love the question, because I'm going to go back to a point I made, which is you give people responsibility, and essentially they earn trust and confidence. And part of that is not just that they're accomplishing their job, but that they're doing it in a way that makes sense for you as a leader, but also for the company. So there's a lot of this, which is, are you responsive to your internal clients? Are you getting the results? I will tell you that we have a certain way, and we're going, we're trying to figure out back to work, back to the office, like every other company, except the ones who said, no, you never have to come back in, and the others who said, you're coming back in 5 days a week. Tech companies like ours are this is all a great international lab experiment. How do we get back? Is it hybrid? Does it make sense? I'll tell you, there's no right answer yet for that. I think we have to recognize that there's been some change that I've always believed people can be productive not sitting in a particular building. And if they earn that trust and confidence and show that they can do it, they're going to get, we're going to be able to have a conversation about what works for them. I'm very much a results-oriented person. How do we accomplish the mission in a way that makes sense for people? That said, I have a lot of, we're a company that is I'm a walk around. I like to come in, drop in, have a conversation, solve a problem very quickly. It's great to see people back in the cafeteria. So I like that face-to-face communication, and just seeing people and reconnecting with people. But I don't think that this issue is this issue is really not a pandemic issue. This is the same thing that was 2 years ago or 18 months ago. How do we accommodate? How do we go back? It's like, if we're going back to pre-pandemic conditions, have we learned anything? And I think we probably, some people probably have, but we're still struggling with the same issues, which is how do we make the workplace work for people who have some of those particular issues. I'll tell you, the way I think about it is, we have good players. We're going to figure out a way that works for them. And the really high potential good people, they don't take advantage of it. Now, if you have a large organization, there's always going to be a knucklehead out there that's going to try and game the system. And that's a different question. And we've talked about that a lot internally. You know, that issue is the same as always, and that's a manager or supervisor issue. I think, Gemma, you've asked the bigger question, which is, can people be productive? And the answer to me is clearly yes. You know, good people can work anywhere. How do you accommodate people who have responsibility, elder care, child care, whatever? And I think there are a lot of questions in there that we as corporation now, putting on our advisor hat, have to think through, because you don't want people in different departments, you know, making up their own rules. You have to really have sort of a coherent plan, and that is, you figure out what the legal rules are, but then it's really, what's your company culture? How does it work? And to me, it's a CEO level decision with input, you know, with comments from the head of HR and the head of legal. And the CEO, you're going to be part of that conversation, but they're going to make a decision. What kind of company are we? How do we work best? But I think it is a really interesting question these days.
I wonder too, on an individual level, you know, we talked about Ben's statement, high productivity, high integrity. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about that in the context of, you know, as attorneys, having transparency on what we can deliver, when we can deliver. You know, if there are distractions during our day because we're at home, some of us still, having transparency about that. So that integrity piece too, I think, plays into this in a significant way right now. It always has. Obviously, as you pointed out, this isn't an exclusively pandemic issue, but just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is, Gemma, you know, a lot of the issues, a lot of the problems sort of in the legal profession around how do we get, you know, the best people who may have some constraints on how they work, and how do we advance them in their careers, has been around for decades. Like a lot of the issues we talk about, women in the workplace, and there's some changes now, we've been talking about for decades. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that we've learned something through this past 18 months that will improve lots of these conditions, because we've learned that people, you know, as you said, you've got a day job and a day job and a night job, right? And you can be effective in your job. We've proved that works. Like, and to your point, I'm going to make a statement, and you're going to tell me if you agree. You don't have work-life balance. You have everything just all at once, right? I mean, and you just you sort of figured it out. It's not optimal, maybe. I don't want to single you out, but people have to deal with a lot of different things, and I think we could do a better job of active listening, understanding, and for people who want to work and participate and advance, figure out a way to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. So on that point, figuring it out, another theme we have here is around creativity or innovation or entrepreneurship, whatever you want to call it, when you are thinking about raising your hand and being proactive. How important is that type of mindset to this work?
Yeah, it's. I'm thinking about that question. I would answer it this way. It can be important if that's what you want to do. If we don't all have to do all these things. Not every one of us has to go run ESG or whatever in a company. There's a lot of sort of core work that needs to get done, and if that's your comfort zone, that's great. Like, but I think you always have to be open to learning and understanding and developing. So even if you want to do sort of one legal area, the world changes. You need to understand and be open to what those changes are and be ahead of it. If you want to do more, then I think you really have to keep an open mind and you know, I'd say be creative. I think creative is a really interesting word, but it's also just keeping an open mind, saying, you know, what can I do? What can I do it's a little bit of a stretch. And usually it's, well, I think it's like entrepreneurs. They look at a problem. There's a problem to be solved. How can I best solve that problem? So they look at something that's bothering people, or why doesn't this work? And they say, we should always ask the question, why are we doing it this way? I love the question, why? And I will often ask why questions of business leaders or outside counsel. And I think that we should all be comfortable with the idea that we we're supposed to have the answers to everything. I said earlier, we have to know everything, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but you're in a room and people are saying, we need the answer now. And sometimes you can say, well, let me go research that. But other times you really need to give people some direction. And I would say that, now I lost my train of thought, or what I was going to say next. And I guess that illustrates my point, which is we don't always have the answers. And we can be seen as, I don't think it's a dumb question. It's like, I don't understand this. Could you explain it to me? And you're asking your business partner something that may be so obvious to them, but is not obvious to you. And it's like when we're in college or whatever, asking that question, there are 10 other people that have the same question, but they didn't raise their hand. And I'm very comfortable raising my hand saying, I just don't understand this. Or can you simplify this for me? And I think you get really good results by asking, why are we doing something a certain way? And then asking, explain this to me, because we have to understand it.
And as a profession, that's really interesting, because I do think we're afraid to show any lack of understanding, any vulnerability. We're attorneys. We're supposed to know. We're supposed to have deep understanding. The profession is built on that, right? You study the precedents. Yeah. You learn the history. You build on that. So we're, supposed to have this deep knowledge, and we do have to learn. You're right. We have to learn to ask those questions and show a little bit of vulnerability or some curiosity. Particularly if we're going to raise our hand and try to be proactive a little bit outside of our lanes.
Yeah,
so, excellent point.
These kind of classic legal issues, like let's say you're working on a 10K or public filing, or marketing comes to you they want you to review a document. It comes up in manufacturing wants to sign a contract with some supplier, and you don't really understand what are they trying to achieve, which they can explain, but why does this work? And I think, again, when people get comfortable, people outside the department get comfortable that you have a solid foundation of legal experience, and you're interested in what they do, you're not asking questions to waste their time. You really want to understand it. And I've pulled out I'm just poor country lawyer, can you explain this to me in simple terms? I am from Tennessee, so I can pull that card occasionally. I don't do that much anymore. But it's like, if you don't understand it, it's better to ask the question then in that room and let people explain it. And usually they like explaining it anyway. But you are vulnerable. I would say that especially when you're just starting out or you're more junior, it's pretty hard to do. But I think you attribute good faith on the part of the people you're talking to, and you give them a chance to help you understand and get better and educate you, and just say, look, this is new to me. I don't understand this particular thing. Could you explain it? And usually people are pretty good about taking time to do that. They'll probably tell you more than you want to hear.
So here's another great question from the participants. What is something you wish that you had known when you started out as general counsel? What advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, people have such good questions. I have to think about that one. We sort of go along and we build up this muscle memory, and we don't remember exactly. I guess I'll put it this way. Maybe the way to answer it is, where are the scars? had you known, could you have avoided this or that? And I think that some of the things that I think about are, I'll revert to, like, no surprises. Make sure people understand what you're doing. And it's a little bit of a balance, because we were talking about how you're trusted to go run this operation, help guide the company, keep the company doing things the correct legal way, high performance to high integrity. But you do need to keep people informed. When you don't do that, then people get surprised. And so communication is a really important thing. I like Gemma's point about listening, and really understanding what people are trying to achieve. So somebody brings you a problem or a question or something they need done, try to understand why they're doing that. What's their goal? What's their motivation? I would say that, there's so many things. Gemma, throw in a few while I'm thinking.
As I was reading it, putting aside eating more chocolate and drinking more wine, I think that being more collaborative right out of the gate. You graduate from law school. I spent time in private practice, sort of slogging through those associate years and, making my way up the ladder. And there is an aura about this profession. And looking back now, I think if there were instances, if I was more collaborative with my fellow associates, a little less competitive, things might have been enhanced for me along the way. That's the one big one that came to my mind as I read the question.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that? That's really interesting. I like that. It goes to this point about when you're in-house, when you've gone in-house, and whether you've gone directly or from a law firm, there are people at different levels. You're working with people at different levels of the organization, and they all have different views of what lawyers do, right? And some say, oh, we don't have it here. Although when we started, it was a little bit of, oh, don't go to legal, it gets stuck there. Now, for most of us on this call who are really good at this, we've been able to correct for that, so that's not a problem. But the flip side of that is sometimes people will look to legal, and if legal says something, they take that as, oh, I have to go do this. And then sometimes they will take that to the next level when they're talking to somebody, oh, legal says we can't do it that way, or legal says we have to do this. So you have to be careful with how you present, communicate, and use your legal power. And to your point, you have to really collaborate well, understand what the business is trying to achieve, and give very clear guidance and instruction. And this goes back also to fact finding. Make sure that when you're being called in or asked something, because maybe you're not already in the room talking about something at a nascent stage, but you're later in the process, and let's hope that over time you've corrected that so people bring you in earlier, but later in the process somebody comes to you and they present a problem. That's where you really want to ask questions so you understand the scope, because they may say, oh, this is what you need to know, but you really need to know this. So I think there's a lot of collaboration, asking questions, again, trying to get to the right answer. I think that's probably a good, that question is a good topic. It would be a good prompt for an article.
For sure. So we only have a few minutes left. Another question. I know it goes fast, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you've been involved with ACC for quite a while, but you've been in the same role. So what does your ACC involvement bring to your role as general counsel and just in general?
Yeah, I started ACC a while ago. I ended up going to one of the annual meetings when they had these in person, which were great, and I met a lot of people. And I found that it brings a lot. It brings sort of networking of like-minded people who want to get really good at what they do, who want to be leaders, who have a lot to contribute. I would say, similar to ACC, a lot of us are involved in nonprofits. And I would say that especially for all of us, but even for people just coming up or new in their jobs, just working with and volunteering at nonprofits, and then eventually maybe a smaller one, getting on their boards, really helps develop all those communication, presentation, all those collaboration skills. So I would encourage that. ACC is like that. It's getting together, whether you're working in a network or on a committee, there's an opportunity to work with people and get smarter. And there are a lot of resources, but you meet some really interesting people. And I'll tell you, the funny thing about it is you learn that the problems you're dealing with are probably not unique. The challenges that you have with your sales organization, going around you or not coming to you, everybody's dealt with that for a while. So you learn, hey, I'm not alone. You learn for new issues, hey, how do we deal with this? What are people seeing out there? And so I think it's been just a great opportunity for meeting people and getting resources and working together with people who are actually pretty fun.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I came in-house in my first role as a one-person general counsel or one-person law department, and finding ACC, the resources, but more importantly, the people, so that there were folks that understood my experience, helped me with that transition, because as we all know, practicing in-house is a little bit different than practicing in a law firm or private practice. So having that network of folks available, and some of my most trusted relationships have been forged through the chapter and other folks within ACC. So Jeff, it's been really great chatting with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. Any final comments, closing remarks?
No, Gemma, thank you for this. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with people. People could had a lot of choices of how to spend their lunch hour, and they chose to come here to ACC, which I appreciate. I hope it's been helpful. For all ACC members, the great thing, I'm going to close with this point, which is now, if you didn't know us before, and everybody knows Gemma, but if you didn't know us before, we're the kind of people you can just reach out to. And if you have a question, how do I plug into this or that, or I have this particular issue, and I think you'll find that of the ACC Northeast Chapter Board and the people that you meet. It's a great resource of all of us who are willing to go out there and talk and figure out how do we all get better, how do we all improve, and how do we make ourselves and our departments and our companies better.
Well, thank you, Jeff, very much. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. Check out upcoming events on the website, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.